We are now going to jump back into Visual Studio and see how we can change our application and introduce the abstract factory pattern. Currently, all that our shopping cart is really doing is allowing us to generate the shipping label for a particular order. We've offloaded the creation of the shipping provider to a separate factory, but now we want to introduce more functionality in our shopping cart. For instance, we might want to generate an invoice, an email summary, and then we want to generate the shipping label for that order. In the commerce section of our business layer, we're going to add an invoice as well as a summary section and fill that with a little bit of data. We're going to add a common interface for all our invoices, which will allow us to generate an invoice template. With this interface in place, we can now introduce a few different invoice generators that allows us to create different types of invoices. This here is simply going to return hello world from a GST invoice as a byte array. So we've got the first type of an invoice. Let's also quickly add two more that represents invoices that can be sent from Sweden. So now we have another object in the application which has a relationship with the order. To make it even more understandable, let's also add a few different summaries of an order to this application before we proceed to add our abstract factory. With the particular state of this application, it might be over-engineering to add the abstract factory pattern to this application. So let's do the same thing for an order summary that we did for the invoice. We're going to create a common interface that allows us to generate a summary for an order. And of course, it would be out of scope if we proceeded to implement the send functionality in this email summary class. So I'm going to leave that up to you. And this is also just going to return some dummy data. If we now go to our finalize method here, if we want to generate an invoice as well as generate and send the summary in this method, one option for us would be to introduce separate factories to generate that. But now what we can do when we have a group of objects with a common theme is that we use the abstract factory pattern. We're going to add the first part of the abstract factory pattern, and that's a common interface for our purchase providers. This purchase provider factory interface will expose creational methods with the common theme. Now, it's really not a requirement that all of these different methods in this interface takes the same amount or the same type of parameters. But in our case, we need the order to create a shipping provider. We, of course, also need the order when we are creating an instance of an invoice, as well as when we are creating the order summary. Although keep in mind that the implementations of these purchase provider factories could return any instantiations as long as they either implement the interfaces or inherits from the abstract class that are returned from these creational methods. So how about we now go ahead and create our first purchase provider factory. Now the Australian purchase provider factory needs to provide functionality to create an invoice, shipping provider, as well as the summary. The implementation of the iInvoice interface that we are going to return out of this factory is going to be the GST invoice. If you recall, the definition of the abstract factory pattern is that it encapsulates a group of individual factories that have a common theme without specifying the concrete classes. I also mentioned earlier the factory that we create with the abstract factory pattern can use existing factories as well. While it's okay to simply create the GST invoice like we do in create invoice, in our create shipping provider method, why not just leverage the pre-existing standard shipping provider factory? We could, of course, also hard code that this here is going to retrieve the shipping provider for Australia, but I like this to be a little bit more flexible than that. Finally, in this purchase provider factory, we're going to allow to create the summary. Now, for some reason, whenever you buy something out of Australia, you'll get all of your order details as a comma-separated file. Obviously, that's just made up. But for the purpose of understanding how this all fits together, this here illustrates that create summary returns the interface, and we can choose if we want to return either the email summary, CSV summary, or any other implementation of the iSummary interface. Now, let's also add the Sweden Purchase Provider Factory. The implementation of the Sweden Purchase Provider Factory is going to be a little bit different. This means that when we use the Sweden Purchase Provider Factory and the recipient and sender country are different, we'll get a no VAT invoice. Let's now also make Create Shipping Provider a little bit different. We are going to return a shipping provider, but we're either going to return the Global Express shipping provider or the standard shipping provider. So what this code block is doing is that it's checking if the sender and recipient country are different. If they are, when you use a Sweden Purchase Provider Factory, you'll get the Global Express shipping provider. And it's created through the Global Shipping Express Provider Factory. This is a good example of using pre-existing factories inside your abstract factory pattern. Now we have the Purchase Provider Factory interface and two different implementations of this factory. Now we can proceed to extend our shopping cart with the functionality needed for us to be able to generate an invoice and a summary. Now we can go ahead and do other things with our Purchase Provider Factory to now use the other instances that can be created through this factory. Now finally, for this program to work, we need to pass either the Australia or Sweden Purchase Provider Factory into our shopping cart. So this here introduced the abstract factory pattern. It's very extensible and allows you to create a common interface or an abstract class that defines how common objects of that factory are created. It exposes these creational methods like create shipping provider, create invoice, and create summary. This is just one example of how this can be applied in a solution.